epicenter of what would be Jefferson City. So if you go down from Glenmore and you go right there, a lot of people think this was the main road through town, but really the road through town was the lower road where the old train station was. That was kind of the main road. And so this was the secondary road. And so I don't, if you look at, if you stand in the Branner Cemetery, you can kind of see where that road, if you did a little landscape off the elevator, you can kind of see where that road kind of went on that side of the cemetery. So the road went there. And the railroad bridge was not the same where it is here, it'd be across the creek. Yeah, so we are standing kind of in that spot. But this is, if you're in the epicenter of the battlefield, this is it. This is the center of the line. And this is where basically on that morning, the Union troops were in Talbot and had pushed all the way up to Talbot and met the rebels, Confederates, head on in Talbot, not as far as Talbot Station, but kind of there, and were pushed back in a running retreat past the Fairview, past the homes there, and came trickling back this way to resettle their line here. So the Union line, if you look at it, started to the far left there and makes a semicircle here and goes all the way back to where we were a minute ago. All right, and so that's so it makes this arc here for the Union line. And so where we stand now is in fact the epicenter of the battlefield. And so Lilly's guns that were over here at one time on the morning, on the 25th and 26th and 27th, and then into the 28th, and then finally on the 29th, were pushed to here, right? So this became the Union center position. Being a former artillery officer, one of the things that we want to do is, artillery is great, but it's not great unless it's supported by infantry or armor, right? And so you won't want to be out there all by yourself, okay? And so Lilly's guns were in a position to be in there. So I'm going to let Mike kind of tell you a little bit about what was going on here, why this is so important to us.
Well, what I like to do is have one of our interpreters step forward and read a quote from Eli Lilly himself, who commanded the guns right here. So come forward and introduce yourself, Eli Lilly, or the man.
I will be Eli Lilly for this corps, and I commanded the 18th Indiana Battery. At 2 a.m. I received orders to take position at daybreak on a slight eminence half a mile east of the bridge at Mossy Creek Station with my entire battery of 5 3-inch ordnance rifle guns, covering the open ground in front. A section was attached and ordered to report to Colonel LaGrange, commanding 2nd Brigade Cavalry, for a movement towards Danvers. The position was taken with the 3 guns. The enemy moved in very heavy force on our front a few moments before 11 a.m. and opened a severe artillery fire on us from 4 pieces. Not, however, till I had developed my position by shelling their advancing lines. I immediately replied, and after a sharp duel of an hour, they brought 3 more pieces to bear upon me at the same time, pressing forward their lines. I now refused to reply to their artillery, save with an occasional shot, but worked with energy on their lines of dismounted cavalry and infantry, which were in good canister range. They were held in check nearly an hour, when by a vigorous movement they placed me under a strong fire of small arms. By advancing to a hill covered with standing corn on my right. From here they were twice driven with canister, when simultaneously to gaining it the third time a strong line was observed moving directly on my front, not more than 150 yards distance.
Thank you, Eli Lilly. Now, add to that, what does all that mean with what we're upon today? Everything from my understanding and research on my own as well as previous generations before me, Lily's Battery is basically over off the third base, off that diamond kind of in that tree line. That was a higher hill or rise. The original road, the Marstown Moss Creek Road that you see today, was not located there. It was actually more this way, running through that vacant field between the old Magnus building and the ball field. So, that was the battlefield. You had the Confederates coming this way. Well, basically where Magnavox is sitting on it, basically, the heart of it, with all the canister they fired and stuff. And Odyssey Road, you know, that's another high eminence. Somewhere in that area was the Confederate artillery. They were dueling. And the shells that they were firing shells to kill other cannons, other artillery. And during that conflict, it was one of Eli Lilly's gun crew. He was actually had his head down, looking at the tube. That's how they were sighting it. Getting it. At that time, the Confederate shell came in, glanced off the tube barrel, and decapitated and killed another man. There was two of them right here. So that entire gun was out of back. Shot. Well, here the Confederate forces are coming down on us, breathing on us hard. Then we got the artillery coming down on us. And we've got to make some moves here. So he was holding the center, but he almost got captured. That's why he had to pull out and set up to another position. Now, you remember I mentioned Mox's guns, or what we call them. They were over basically behind Glenmore and on that hill from above the creek. They were looking down Chucky Pike and the railroad. And you had Confederate forces using the railroad cut, some of them, where the water tank is today. That part of the field was just peppered with spherical canister shot, as well as this over here. But see, a lot of that's developed, a lot of that's gone now. And like I say, coming down the road, and Confederates trying to outflank. Some of us call it the valleys over there, the Valley of Death, where they was trying to outflank, and where they were shooting shells that missed and landed way up the road, as they say. So, I'm telling you this, it was a concentrated fight that it covered miles, the battlefield. It's sometimes hard to get at in our modern day minds of the terrain and the square miles that were involved in this. So basically, 160 years ago today, a lot of this done been wiped out. It was that bad of a day. Lead poison, spherical and canister case shot. So I'll turn it back over to David to follow up on some of that.
Sure. So one of the great stories, if you read about it, is that the two soldiers, the sergeant and the corporal that were killed was in firing the cannon, Lilly's guns were in a position where they had to move. As you heard, they had to move because they were being overwhelmed. The 9th Pennsylvania Cavalry was stretched basically from here to protect also Mott's guns or the Elgin Battery here. So they were stretched thin this way. You had the 1st Tennessee that was sitting on this side, cavalry that was sitting dismounted, and they were trying to protect on the left side. And then you had the 2nd Michigan, and you had the 118th Ohio that marched into the woods there. And I know in a minute we're going to share kind of an account from that. But I do want us to understand, like, there's units that are coming up here. You know, every time you fire an piece of artillery, you got to go get another piece to put in. So you have horses that are back here, and you have caissons, and you have artillery pieces. when they did move Lily's pieces from here to over to the hill, the horses were so spooked and shot up too from the fire that they had to wheel one of them by hand over there. And so when you read the accounts, a lot of Lily's men were wounded. In fact, one of the officers was shot through the arm and couldn't even use the arm anymore. And they tried to get him to go to the hospital. Well, the hospital was down this way. It is where the Westview Cemetery is now, was where the Union Hospital was. And they said, go to the hospital. He said, well, with my good arm, I can hold down the telegraph wires so that we can get the pieces through there. So it's a different age, right? We get clipped sometimes with a broken fingernail. These guys have been shot through the arm, and he's still finding out ways that he can help. And so one of the things that Kelly gave me was, when we were talking about William Jackson Palmer over there a second ago, and just basically in his response is that what he said basically was, my command was ordered to hold this position to support the battery on the hill right there, right? And so he did that in connection with the 9th Pennsylvania that we said it was stretched across. And they were fighting the 3rd Alabama Cavalry. This position was on the extreme right of the line and protected the only single bridge that went across the creek and across the ground. And I was able to protect that defense. And when he did, and he had the 15th Pennsylvania and the 10th Ohio Cavalry and some others, he lost his adjutant, like we said, that was shot through the lungs. And so this is a hot engagement. This is a lot of things going on. The 118th Ohio, this was the first time they had ever fought, right? And so they were sent. Thomas Young was in charge of that. Mott was in charge of them and the artillery pieces. So Mott gets control, but Young was in charge of that. And so they brought Young up, who was down here, and they bring him up and they say, all right, now you need to go influence the battle. Mike had mentioned there were artillery pieces on the other side firing at the Union forces. In fact, the Confederates ran out of artillery pieces, and they said that they used some of the old railroad. And so they would hear the whistling of railroad pieces of metal from the railroad that were coming by and took people's heads off too and wounded them. So the 118th goes into a heavy woods over there, and they decide, this is our first engagement. We're really going to do something special. We're going to charge right into the artillery. Not a good idea. Do you want to read? Do you want to read what happened?
No, what do we want to do? Canvas thing? Or do you want to do
118.
118. Okay.
So this is an account of Benton Thompson. He was a young man of 17, and just for a little bit of reality, I have a young man here who's 17 years old reading the account. A lot of times we see Civil War images of older looking men with big old beards, and they got wear lines, but most of these men in the 118th Ohio were young boys, and they were fresh soldiers, meaning they had never seen a battle. They had just been assigned to the Army of the Cumberland, whatever that means. They're just young men. But this is the original letter, graciously provided for our use from Mike Beck of the Longstreet Museum. And afterwards, if you want to read the whole letter, if you want to see the envelope that's postmarked Knoxville, certainly come and see us. But we're going to have a little bit of an account of young Thompson's first battle here at Mossy Creek. So, second and third. Louder. Oh, there's an elbow, there's a turn. Perfect.
Yeah, pause just a little bit. I'm just trying to get away. See, the train is still running in the same original road bed. The only thing that they've done, basically, since the railroad completed in 1858, is raise the elevation and widen. So a lot of that ground has been terraformed, but that's still the original railroad property from the 1850s. And talking about some of the casualties, the Georgia cavalry that were wounded here in this conflict that are buried in Bethesda Cemetery, to give you an idea, because that was their territory. And Bethesda Church was an actual full-blown Confederate hospital, not an aid station or a triage like they use this hospital. Well, there's a difference between a real hospital and an aid station that patch you up and get you. So, I think we can start now. Yeah. Just turn the volume up there. Get up real close. Louder. Crank it up.
We said the fight commenced about 8 o'clock in the morning and lasted all day. Our regiment was in the hottest of fights, also the most killed and wounded than any other regiment in the fight. I was not in the regiment, but it went into the fight and did not get with it until near dark. John West and myself happened to be out of camp some in the distance when we heard the fighting commence. We broke for camp and got our guns and went into it on our own hook. We come very near getting right among the Rebs before we knew. We were trying to get into a piece of woods close by and we were fired on by the Rebs who were retreating out of the woods. The boys run some mighty narrow chances from shells that were bursting into the air. All the time, besides the bullets were flying in every direction, high and low. There was none killed in our company. There was 3 wounded. Captain Kramer of Company B was shot through the head, and the sergeant that was with you on Long Island was wounded in the first fire in the arm, and I'm afraid it will never get well. There were several killed and about 50 wounded. It was a very terrible sight to see the killed laying around over the field and hear the wounded groaning for help. The Rebs undertook to carry away their killed and wounded, and they had so many that we chased them so fast they could not do it, and therefore they had to lose. I can say now that I have been in a battle and came out all right, and I think there is a considerable prospect for any other fight before long. Wherever old Longstreet undertakes to get away from where he is, we'll have to do some small tall fighting before we can get through our lines. The boys in our regiment are almost naked and have nothing to eat but some cornbread and beef and a little coffee. And the weather is very cold now in this country, and the ground is covered with snow, and the boys suffer a great deal on account of the cold. I have pretty good times myself, for I have no duty to go outdoors. The captain has to me to do his writing, and therefore I have nothing to do but write wherever he has any writing to do.
Thank you. So you can understand a little bit of where it is and when it is. The 118th decides that they're going to attack, and then basically what happens is they get stuck in the woods. Right? They can't come out of the woods because they would be overwhelmed. And so there are regiments from Tennessee and from Georgia that will go around them on both sides. And so basically during the battle, they're stuck in a defended position in the woods right there. So during this entire battle, as Confederates flank them, they still are stuck in there. They're led by a man by the name of Colonel Thomas Young. Thomas Young would become the governor of Ohio about 10 years later, right after Rutherford B. Hayes. When Rutherford B. Hayes became president. So Thomas Young was the governor, would become the governor of Ohio, and he was leading them in the battle there, and it was their first time in battle. You had units like the 25th Michigan and a unit from Indiana that were also in reserve, that were here stuck behind the hill, behind the artillery, in case the Union had to retreat. You always wanted to have infantry to protect, because cavalry doesn't do well to fire right in directly into infantry because of the density of the fire. So that's the position they were at. And so you have the 1st Tennessee Union Cavalry, the 2nd Michigan Cavalry, and the 9th Pennsylvania, and they see that Lilly's guns are being overwhelmed. They have to roll Lilly's guns up to the hill here to get its last position, and so then they move up to there. So the Union line is collapsing this way. It's protected on this side from Mott's guns or the Elgin Battery, but the center, and they have reserve infantry here, and the Confederates are trying to make an attack going around the outside to the last Union position here. All while we remember they sent fast riders to go get 2nd Brigade and go go help. All right. So this is the mid-afternoon when the situation is most dire for the Union Army and most positive for the Confederate Army. They've worked to get online. The Texas Rangers have worked to, and soldiers from Arkansas have worked to get online and work across, like Mike said, where Walmart is and everything else. And they're starting to make a steady push that way too. And so if you can picture yourself, it's about 3 in the afternoon, a little bit later, and things are most dire for the Union Army at this point. So we're going to go to the last stop on our tour, and then we're going to have a couple more interpretive readings and a couple things for us. We're going to go to the Masonite factory, which is basically you're going to make a left right here and just go up the hill, and it's going to be there. If you need assistance in walking, there's a couple spots in their parking lot that we're okay to use. If not, it's okay to park along the side of the road right there and just walk out and walk right there. And so that's where we're going to go. Now, I do want to put a couple plugs in here for things that you may want to look at on your own, and just with this group and the weather being such. The marker for this battle is right over there. So if you ever want to do that. There is also the Branner Cemetery. And so when I first started my research into Mossy Creek, and I was reading through the newspapers about these people that were larger than life and that were important in development, a lot of them are buried right there. Like John Roper Branner, who built Glenmore, and Branner Street is named after him. The existence of Carson Newman has a lot to do with Branner. There are people that are in this area. This area was largely Whig, right? And if you understand the politics of the 1800s, Whigs tended to be more aligned with the federal government than we were with the state government, because they believed the federal government was going to do larger projects and things like that. And so a lot of the people in this area were Whigs, because their allegiance was more to the federal government, who they had fought for in wars against Mexico and against the native peoples. And so a lot of people in this area were natural Whigs. And so a lot of the people that you see that are involved in the Whig Party in the 1840s and 1850s are buried over here. The first president of Carson Newman, at that time Missionary Baptist College, Rogers, is buried over there. The only Union person that we know, and I don't want to spoil it, so I don't want to say, is buried over there. There are Confederates that are buried over there. And so if you have time and you just want to go for a walk one time, because of some things that the prisoners have done, and Sheila has done a really good job of making sure that they pour gravel down to there. And my classes at Carson Newman have done some gravestone restoration over there. It is a neat place to go and understand some of our past history, especially of people that have made an impact on where we stand today. But if you go over here right now, if you have any questions, certainly we'll linger for a few minutes about this area, and then we'll go over there to the Masonite factory on top of the hill right there.
Any questions?
What was the terrain like right here? Obviously, it wasn't just flat.
It was a little bit more wooded. I mean, this would all be wood.
And this was this was definitely elevated before the ball fields and stuff, because that's what's left of the eminence is over in that section.
This wasn't higher, it's lower.
There was a hill.
It was higher. This was higher. They flattened it out.
Okay.
Yeah. I bet these ball fields. Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah.